All right. So Dan I don't know if he'll make it today, but Dan, for our fall discipleship, we're looking at 1st and 2nd Kings for the next 6 weeks, and we're reading big chunks of the book. But Dan found this excellent book from Nav Press. Nav Press, if you're not familiar, they are their specialty is discipleship, and a lot of what they produce is geared toward Christians discipling other Christians. The goal for this class, Dan really wanted us to focus on the acts, the deeds of the kings of Israel, and that we learn from their behavior, good and bad. And so we're not necessarily looking at the political goings on of Israel, like when did this king rule with this king and stuff like that. So a lot of that type of information, this book is really good, giving you a overview of the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. There's charts in there that help you know what king ruled in Israel, what king ruled in the southern king of Judah, the years they ruled, and stuff like that. So it gives you timelines. Very excellent. I really like this book. And the format that we will fall into, so this is a 6-week course, and we're reading big chunks of the book. And so we'll follow the outline in here, and there's some guided questions that you can work through. So I was just saying, we ordered these, but the timing of their arrival, the camp last week, we weren't able to hand these out. So when I teach today, I'm assuming that we haven't read the lesson for the day. That's why I printed out this outline. If you haven't got one, my son Noah has some, so if you need one, just raise your hand. So I'm working off the assumption that we haven't read the lesson, but next week we'll be doing lesson 2, which is 1 Kings 5 through 8. So if you want to work through that for next week. So the goal for the class, again, we want to learn from the acts of the kings of Israel. So first, I thought a good theme verse, if y'all want to turn to 1 Corinthians 10, we're going to read verses 1 through 6. A very common question is, how do we read the Old Testament? And it's a big question. But this is kind of where Dan wanted us to go for this class. And I thought what Paul says in 1 Corinthians is a great kind of theme for what we're doing. Would someone like to read 1 through 6 in 1 Corinthians chapter 10? I'll let y'all turn there. Okay, I'll read. Oh, okay. Sheila?
For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud, and that they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did.
Yes, so verse 6 is key. Now these things happened as examples for us. So as we read the Old Testament, yes, the Old Testament prepares us for the coming of Christ. We see how through the prophets, how God is preparing Israel and the world for the coming of Christ. But we also read the Old Testament as Christians. We learn from the examples of the Israelites. If you read verses 7 through 13, things like we learn not to be idolaters, not to act immorally, not to test the Lord, not to grumble, and things like that. So as we work through 1st and 2nd Kings, we are going to see the behaviors of King David, King Solomon, the kings of the North Kingdom, the South Kingdom, and what can we as Christians learn from that. There is a lot in these stories that we can learn. So we're recording this. We encourage questions, comments. Please feel free to interrupt, raise your hand. For the sake of the recording, I may repeat the question for those who are not able to join, that they can hear what you ask. So I welcome questions. So I teach high school Bible, and I like questions. I like the interaction. So please don't hesitate. And again, I have this outline here. I've kind of broken up our lesson for the day into four points that we're going to look at. I will be honest, yesterday my allergies were really bad. So if it doesn't make sense, I hadn't taken Benadryl yet. Yesterday was a really, really hard day. But here we go. So 1st and 2nd Kings, well, we're in 1st Kings. We'll look at the first 3 chapters. So we already did number 1, how do the kings teach us to obey God's word? Where we're going to look at the good things they did, the bad things they did. Again, God put this in the Bible for us to learn from them. If you turn real quick, let's go to 1 Kings 3. 1 Kings 3, verse 3. If you want to put another verse under number 1, that will kind of help guide us through this lesson. We see something that the author says about Solomon. Now, Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David. That phrase, walking according to the acts of David, not walking according to the acts of David, that's something that we're going to see a lot through the books of 1st and 2nd Kings. They measure the king and his success whether he obeyed the Lord like David did or whether he did not. Okay? And so that type of phrase and what we see in 1 Corinthians 10 is going to guide us as we go through the books. But I do think it's important we understand what's going on for us to really understand what lessons we learn. So again, because many of us weren't able to read prior to our time today, I'll summarize a lot of what we see in these passages. If you have read through it, feel free to jump in. I try to break it down into what type of lessons we can learn from this. So, any questions before we jump in? Any thoughts? All right, the chocolate donuts are going quick. I think I should have bought more. So, okay. So, 1 Kings chapter 1. So, if you remember, 1st and 2nd Samuel is about Israel moving out of the time of the judges, and they want a king. King Saul is chosen first. He proves to be an unfaithful king, and God gives the kingdom of Israel to David. And so, really in 1 Kings, we see Saul and his actions losing the kingdom, chasing David. 2 Kings, David is king over Israel. We see the choosing of the site of the temple at the end of 2 Kings. Jerusalem is now the capital. And so 1 Kings, we see David is old. So the first section, chapter 1 really, but the book opens with David being old, preparing, well, not really preparing, but how the transition happens between David and Solomon. But there is some intrigue. Do y'all remember what happened with David early in his reign? What major event? Well, there's a lot, but I'm thinking of his son. Which one are you thinking of?
The name I can't remember.
Was it Absalom? Yes, yes. So Absalom tried to take the kingdom from his father, but there was something major before that as well. A very relationship with Bathsheba. And I think, so if you don't remember, is it 2 Samuel 12-ish, around there? David falls into adultery with Bathsheba, makes it worse by killing her husband to try to cover it up. And then, yes, the Lord forgives David. We read in Psalm 51, David's confession. I do think that the Lord forgave David. But if you look at his family, and starting with Absalom, his family life after that was not the greatest. And so Absalom in 2 Samuel tried to take the kingdom from David. And now we see Adoniah is trying to do the same. Adoniah is another son of David through one of his wives. David did have multiple wives. But we see David, a man after God's own heart. You see on letter A, on number 2, that David is a godly king, yet he had his shortcomings. And we see in verse 6. So, well, let's go to verse 5. Would someone like to read verses 5 through 7 of chapter 1? Okay.
Now Adonijah the son of Haggith exalted himself, saying, I will be king. And he prepared for himself chariots and horsemen, and 50 men to run before him. His father had never at any time displeased him by asking, Why have you done thus and so? He was also a very handsome man, and he was born next after Absalom. He conferred with Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar, the priest, and they followed Adonijah and helped him. But Zadok the priest and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and Nathan the prophet, and Shimei and Rai and David's mighty men were not with Abijah.
That's right. So we have some palace intrigue. There is a promise that was made that Solomon would follow David as king. But if you've looked throughout world history, the brothers and sisters of the promised successor are very rarely happy, and a lot of stuff happens to try to take over the throne. And so Adonijah tries to take the throne. He takes some of the key people who have served David to follow him. But there are also other key people who choose not to follow Adonijah. But verse 6, as we look at the character and what we can learn, so David is well aware of what's going on. So as we look at this godly king, we also see that he also has his faults. Verse 6, he says he had never crossed Adonijah at any time by asking, what have you done? So that idea, I don't know what your translate, I'm working out of the New American Standard. Does someone else have a different translation, and what does it say?
David never reprimanded him about anything.
And what translation are you using? Okay, yeah, I'd never reprimanded. Does someone else have anything? NIV?
Says review.
Rebuked, okay.
New King James, and his father had not rebuked him at any time by saying, why have you done
Right. So the New King James, NIV, rebuked. I liked the New says reprimand. So David never confronted his son. So what kind of picture are we getting of David in this verse?
Hands off He definitely
Hand-
spoiled this one.
Yeah, hands-off parenting. A gentle parent, which is a thing in, yeah. Passivity, would that be?
It seems true also with his dealings with Absalom as well.
Yes.
I don't wanna fight my son. When you find the boy, don't lay a hand on him.
Yes.
And so there seems to be a consistency for him towards his boys when one of his sons rapes his daughter.
Mm-hmm.
That's not really handled.
Mm-hmm.
And so it
they
festers
handle
within
it.
the family.
I like it festers. So for the recording, it was brought up that what David's doing with Adonijah, he did the exact same thing with Absalom. And I like what she said, like it just festered. Hands-off parenting. So the word that is translated into rebuke, Mai says he never crossed him, he never reprimanded. The word is he did not pain Adonijah. So that idea of conflict, when you confront someone, there's pain involved. And David seemed to avoid that. So as we look at our walk with the Lord, whatever role we find ourselves in, whether it's a parent, whether it's an employee, a boss, what types of things can we glean from this? This is an example of something negative in David's life that we can learn from. So I'll open the floor for that. Any thoughts? What can we glean from this? Is confrontation always bad?
I think a lot of people define love as not having confrontation and not having those tough conversations,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't really develop love.
Right. So sometimes love requires confrontation. Yeah. I've said in men's group before that, I had a father like this. There was passivity. I love my father. He did great things. But sometimes you can swing the other way, and you can be too painful, which I have to watch out for. But here we see David. We see what it causes. Lack of confrontation can actually make it worse. That pain is not always a bad thing. Think about going to the doctor and surgery. There's pain in surgery, and yet, does it bring healing in the long run? It does. Well, it should. It does. So again, we see David, yes, a man forgiven by God, but I truly think his actions with Bathsheba affected his relationships with his family. And it's interesting to think about. You bring up Absalom. Why was David passive or hands off? Did it come out of guilt? The pain, the remembrance of what he did, did that lead him to be more hands off? What kind of father would he have been if he hadn't done that? It's really interesting to think about. So any other thoughts? Yeah.
I think when I'm reading this and I think about what we're talking about, I'm also reminded that David's father and his birth home, he was the youngest,
Mm-hmm.
and the older brothers were already promoted, and they were given all that respect, and he was always relegated out to the hills to be shepherding. And I wonder if that didn't influence him too. I'm going to do better for my kids. And
Oh, that's interesting.
mean?
Yeah, I've never thought of that. So, again, David's own upbringing influencing how he parents. Yeah. And we'll look at that if we have time. When we get to Solomon, how do we understand a godly king with multiple wives? To kind of give you kind of a preview, Israel wanted a king like the nations. And so we see their shortcomings even in that. I don't think that's what God intended for David and Solomon to do. And yet we see, even in this, the negative consequences of even David and Solomon acting like the kings of their neighbors, the kings of the world. But we also see David keeping his promise. So Bathsheba, let me see if I wrote it down. There was, if you read, I did not write it down. Oh yes, I believe it is 1 Chronicles 22, 9 through 13. Also, 2 Samuel 12, 24, God makes it very clear that Solomon has been chosen to follow David as king. And so Bathsheba remembers that. David told her he will follow me in rule. And she gathers Nathan the prophet. Nathan the prophet's the very guy who called David out on his sin. And the other men who did not follow after Adonijah, Bathsheba confronts David. And David is kind of, it seems like he's kind of waking out of his stupor. Okay, he's letting his son do what he's doing. And she calls him and says, let's see, verse 17, "My Lord, you swore to your maidservant by the Lord your God, saying, surely Solomon shall be king after me, and he shall sit on my throne." And then Nathan the prophet walks in, and he does the same thing. That was a little bit planned by Bathsheba and Nathan to kind of enforce upon David, you made a promise. And so we see in verses 29 through 30 that David says, "As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all distress, as I vowed to you, I will do." Okay? And so it is made very clear. And as you read the rest of chapter 1, they do the official procedures for anointing the king. And we're going to compare that to what Adonijah did. But what do y'all think about how the Bible presents the good and the bad of the characters in the Bible? If you like history, or if you watch documentaries, is this normal when they present the life of a person? What do they tend to do?
They tend to show the best sides or the worst, depending on the topic.
That's right. Sometimes it's very one-sided. And yet in one passage, we get the good and the bad. Yeah. I know there's painters who painted portraits used to leave out the moles, the pockmarks and stuff like that. But the picture we get of David, even though he has shortcomings, that he is faithful to his promises. So as we look at our Christian walk, David being a type of Christ, God keeping his promises, but even the promises that we make to the people around us, as we are walking, are we keeping to our word? Are we ones being trustworthy with our word? So let's move on to Adonijah. So now Adonijah, his name is very interesting. It means my Lord is God. My Lord is the Lord. And yet he exalts himself. He takes key men who obviously want him to be king as well. And he moves throughout the city. He has messengers announcing him as king. If you look toward about verse 38 and following, you see that Adonijah announces himself as king, but he doesn't do it the proper way. He takes the people out of the city. Those who follow him, they take them out of the city of Jerusalem. They have a big feast, and they announce him as king. Now, I think we can even learn from Adonijah. There are things that we want in life, things that we desire, sometimes good. So let's focus on that, the things that are good. How do we often short circuit what God wants to get what we want? Does that make sense? Well, do we do that? Sometimes I do that. Sometimes, have you ever prayed for something and you're waiting and you get tired of waiting, and so you decide to take matters into your own hands? I think with Adonijah, we see, oh no, you're good, you're good. So I think we can learn that from Adonijah and what he's doing, that there are times that we grab hold of things that we want and we short circuit what God wants. We know clearly, as we'll see in chapter 2, that Adonijah wanted to be king. He knows God chose Solomon. Let's see, if you look in verse 15 of chapter 2, Adonijah says, "You know that the kingdom was mine and that all Israel expected me to be king." And he admits that Solomon being king was of the Lord. So I think we can learn two things, is that sometimes in the good things that we desire, we take things into our own hands. But are there things that we desire that the Lord doesn't allow, that we try to grab hold of, that we try to get on our own? I think it should cause us to look at our desires. I think it teaches us patience. Any thoughts? Yeah.
I think just from a practical standpoint, David's passivity in not dealing with his family led to confusion. Whereas if he had been direct from the beginning and said, "Hey, I'm getting old, and these are my wishes," then it takes all the questions out. In dealing with families who are grieving and then have to sort out an inheritance, it's one of the most lucrative things for lawyers, because kids can't get along. Everybody thinks they're entitled to something. And if mom or dad had just read the will ahead of time to everyone and said, "These are my wishes," it would eliminate a lot of that confusion. And so I think David, in not wanting to hurt anybody's feelings,
Yeah.
just kind of avoided,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna not declare anybody king, and that just allowed for the confusion and for the upheaval.
Yeah.
So it's convicting for me, because I tend to be that way. I'll just let it play out. And so rather than doing the small uncomfortable thing up front, I end up having to do the really hard, bigger, more uncomfortable thing later on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if David had just been straightforward and said, "Hey, I'm getting old, Solomon's going to be king."
Yeah.
A lot of confusion.
I like how you said how sometimes, letting it play out. I think I fall to the other extreme. I don't listen. I jump the gun and try to get ahead of it without letting it play out and listen. I think we have, that's two extremes of what should be done. I think what we'll see in chapter 2 is Solomon is walking out how David should have walked. We'll see Solomon acting in wisdom. And I think, as we move on to number 3, we can move on to number 3, because I think that's a good segue, is Solomon is enacting justice against those who have defied David when he was king. And if you read chapter 2 is a really interesting chapter, but I think it gives us a picture of addressing an issue, but not falling into the extremes of passivity or the other extreme of jumping the gun. Because I think jumping the gun and not listening and playing out can be just as harmful as hands off and then having to fix a bigger mess at the end. I think both extremes, especially in a parenting relationship or in an employee-employer relationship, or even just friendships and relationships, both extremes can cause problems. Since pastors, what time should I end? 9:45? Yeah, that's great. Okay. So as we go into number 2, so I don't know, before we jump into that, because I think that was a great segue, but Adonijah and our desires. Yes, I don't think Adonijah, I think his desire for the kingship was a sinful desire because he knew that God chose Solomon. But at the same time, I think in what Adonijah did in trying to work things to his favor, we can learn from that as we pray and think through our desires. Is this something the Lord has forbidden? Is this something that this is good, but I need to wait on the Lord and things like that? I think even then we can still learn from Adonijah. But, oh yes.
Just, again, the political motivations are also contained in this. And he does meet with Bathsheba.
Yes.
She's also using her power
Yeah.
to give a force. In addition to Adoniah is in the proper birth order, older than Solomon. So I think that there's a whole lot at play here.
There is.
Of various people and it being not just family issues, but also
Political issues, yeah. Because what are you looking at when Adonijah and Bathsheba talk in? Oh, where do they talk? Yeah.
David answering and said, "Call Bathsheba to me." So she came to the king's presence, stood and took an oath, word lives. Anyway, so there's just the pull,
Yeah.
push and pull of, wait a minute, this promise was made to me, but before Bathsheba was even a part of his life, before his sin with her, there might have been sincere promises made to the mother, or certainly, we just don't know.
Yeah, there is at least the assumption, I'm the oldest. We see that with Jacob's sons as well. Yeah. It is interesting. Did I hear my name? Oh, yeah.
From your wife.
Oh.
I'm wondering if David's passivity, his tendencies towards that, they contributed towards festering in his own family, but I'm trying to work out in my head too how much they may have contributed to the division of the kingdom. That festering didn't just affect his family.
I think that played a role. So the split of the northern tribes from the southern tribes, we'll see in 1 Kings. But I think those division lines we see earlier, going, I think, further back than the kingdom. The tribe of Ephraim saw itself as a standout tribe among the Israelites. So even in the time of Judges, I think there's some fault lines. And then when Saul is chosen as king, that created another fault line because he loses the kingdom and it's given to David. And if you read 1 and 2 Samuel, when Saul dies, Judah announces David as king. It's not till 7 years later that David is king of all of Israel. And those fault lines, the northern tribes were faithful to Saul, and it was through political stuff. And we'll meet Joab, but Abner was the captain of the guard for Saul, and that he said, "Look, David, I'll bring you the kingdom." So it's very, very, very interesting. You had the political stuff that's going on. Bathsheba's role is interesting in chapter 2 because Adonijah asked for a concubine of David's in marriage. And so if you read the first few verses of chapter 1, we see that David gets a new concubine to help him in his old age. And so Adonijah, who already tried to rip the kingdom from his dad, is now asking for her in marriage. That was a calculated move, and Solomon saw through that as, you're trying to, an underhanded way to get the kingdom from me. So speaking of Solomon acting wisely, we have a dad who was passive. Here I think we see in chapter 2, Solomon acting wisely, okay? And so David wisely encourages Solomon to walk in the ways of the Lord, to not forget his commandments. And we see that in verses 1 through 4. And so I think the rest of chapter 2 is Solomon doing what his dad encouraged him to do, to act wisely. Because what chapter 2 is dealing with are Joab, Adonijah, and Shimei, or Shammai, yes. No, you're good. You're good. Shammai. 3 men who had some very particular actions against David when David was king. Well, we have Adonijah trying to take the kingdom. We have Joab who killed men in times of peace to get what he wanted. He did not think David was acting rightly, and so Joab tried to take things into his own hands. Then we have Shammai, who cursed David, and that was a punishable offense. If you read the Mosaic Law, they are said you are not to curse the king, okay? But David shows grace. But in David's charge to Solomon, he says, you need to take care of these men for the wrongs that they've done. But again, what we see, I think there's that theme of passivity versus jumping the gun, but Solomon, in following wisdom, and I'm sure there's proverbs about this, but I was needing Benadryl and I didn't look for it in Proverbs. But Solomon walked that line between jumping the gun and passivity. If you read chapter 2, Solomon wasn't vengeful. He wasn't taking revenge against his father. Taking revenge for the sake of his father. But he also he was keeping a watchful eye. And so as you read chapter 2, he's letting things play out, and he's letting the hearts of these 3 men to be revealed, and Solomon taking the appropriate action. Again, I think it's a good contrast to what we saw with his father in chapter 1. I wish I would have gone through and for each of the gentlemen found some proverbs, because again, Solomon wrote proverbs, okay? I do think Solomon wrote proverbs early in his reign before he was led astray. And these are the types of things that he was doing as he led the kingdom of Israel. But it's a fascinating read, chapter 2. But what you do see, and sometimes as a teacher I do this, I let things play. I do it better in the classroom than other areas of my life, but letting things play out for people to reveal their true hearts and to act accordingly. But so let me just kind of open it. So if I'm making the argument, Solomon is acting wisely. As he's acting wisely, he writes the book of Proverbs. Let me just kind of, what Proverbs have been influential in your own walk with the Lord? As we look at the author of the Proverbs, what are some Proverbs that he has written that have been influential in your walk with the Lord? Because I think, reading Proverbs, applying it to our life, is doing what David says, keeping the charge of the Lord our God to walk in his ways. Proverbs is a picture of how we walk in the ways of the Lord.
Richard, I've really found encouragement and conviction probably too in Proverbs 18, verse. Oh yeah, verse 13. If one gives an answer before he hears, it's his folly and shame. Just even in just encouragement to be quick to listen, not be quick to give an answer.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be just counseling, we're all counselors, so every day, whether it be informally or formally, we're hearing other people and trying to give some counsel in whatever way. Just be quick to listen in a situation before I try to give an answer. So.
Yeah. Any other Proverbs? I know we're bumping up on time, so. Okay, so it is 9:45. We didn't get to 1 Kings 3, but again, Solomon, wisdom in his prayer, wisdom on display, and yet, and if you look at number 4, letter C, and yet, even early in Solomon's career as king, we see cracks in the foundation. He marries an Egyptian princess as a political alliance. And again, we see this tendency, even though they're faithful, they are like the kings of the world. And so it's a good question to ask ourselves as we walk faithfully with the Lord, how are we like the world? And we all have that tendency. Now for Solomon, this will really come into play later, but as we walk faithfully, keeping God's commandments, how are we like the world? I think is what we see in the first 5 verses of chapter 3. But I think that's it. There's more donuts, powdered donuts. There's plenty. You might have to fight over the chocolate donuts or grapes, but. Let's close in prayer. And again, if you're interested in a book, these are $10. Nav Press published these. These are excellent. And I believe Dan will be with us next week.